Hi, welcome to Ketobiography. I'm your host, Robyn Dobbins. Today's guest is a software engineer who turned a personal curiosity about cholesterol into a global movement challenging conventional medical views. His interests led to the publication of numerous studies and the formation of Cholesterol Code, Citizen Science Foundation, Own Your Labs, and my favorite gathering, COSI, the Collaborative Science Conference. Since he's not busy enough, he now hosts the Feldman Protocol podcast, where he explores nutrition, science, and wellness. He's always pushing boundaries, whether he intends to or not, and sparking important conversations. Please welcome Dave Feldman to Ketobiography. Hello, Dave.
Hey, Robyn. Thank you for having me.
Of course. I hope I didn't miss anything because there's just so many things that you're dabbling in. I think it should have said somewhere on there is going on a really long vacation, but that is omitted from the conversation for right now. But you're doing a lot for all of us. So what I usually do on this show is turn it over to my guests to kind of tell their story. But I want to start off with a conversation that you and I had that sparked us doing this in the first place. And that is, you said this to me. I'm going to read it. You said, at the end of the day, the best stories include a lot of struggle and overcoming odds. And I certainly have one of those under my belt now. And I was like, I can't not talk to Dave because he's got an incredible story. Honestly, I was holding off. I wanted to talk to you closer to the film's release, but now I just need to hear this story of overcoming the odds. So, I know we can get into your personal story, but I also feel like that's out there. You've already said that, so I can direct anybody who's listening to any number of different podcasts out there where you tell how you got your start. I want to actually focus on this kind of like in between April and right now and what has happened, because I feel like that story is probably pretty compelling. There may be some things that I didn't understand was going on. I know for myself personally, in May, I was like offline. So because I have this connection to this Keto CTA study and being in the film and all that, people are reaching out to me, asking me questions, and I was like offline. I was like, I don't know what's going on. So very excited to hear from your perspective what happened after the release of the Keto CTA study till now and your most recent talk at the SMH conference.
Yeah, so this is kind of a good opportunity, I suppose, in that I think this is literally the first interview that I've taken, now that I think about it, since I did my presentation at Low Carb USA, which is where I was kind of cleared to share some of the bits of the story that I guess I can unpack here as well. So when we were shooting the film, the Cholesterol Code film, which features you, by the way, one of our most compelling stories. And thanks again, not only for appearing, but bringing us into your home and your family, sharing the enormous things you've overcome, which I love our film. I can't wait for it to finally be out.
I know, I'm sitting on the edge of my seat waiting.
Yes, although the events since April will make a final last chapter that came in. So what happened is while we were filming against the first data set, or I should say the first analysis of our existing data set of the 200 scans of our 100 participants that came in. And perhaps to set the stage a little bit for your audience, this was the Keto CTA study is it's a study that I spearheaded for us to crowdfund and ultimately work with a research center, Lundquist Institute, to bring all of our participants to it over a span of, I want to say it took around 16 months to get baseline scans. So they would all get a first scan. And by scans, I mean CT angiography, which is like a high resolution heart scan where you can see both hard and soft plaque. We won't get into the details, but gives us a good scan. And then every participant, based on when their first scan was, would come back roughly about a year later to get a second scan. And that way we would have these 200 scans, 100 baseline, 100 follow-up, to then compare how their plaque changed or progressed, and what it was that we could see there. Now, when we got the original analysis, it was something known as a semi-quantitative analysis. Semi-quantitative analysis is where expert readers like Dr. Budoff are blinded to the order of the scans, but they are scoring it. They're looking through a predetermined route of different points throughout the coronary arteries, and then they observe whether or not there's any visible plaque in one of these junction points or one of these shear stress points or whatever. And then they give it a score. It's 0 means that there's no plaque, 1 means there's very mild amounts, 2 medium, and 3 is heavy plaque, sometimes occlusion. And there's 15 predetermined points, and therefore, since it can be a score from 0 to 3, that means there's a maximum of 45. And we're feeling pretty good because the baseline analysis for the semi-quantitative looked especially good, given that at least at a population level, there was not hardly anybody with extremely high levels, relatively speaking. Now, that said, it is what's called a heterogeneous group, in that there is a subset of those that did have higher plaque at baseline. But we weren't surprised by that, given our average population is middle age. And as I also talked about in the recent presentation, we do have a number of people who came from, poor metabolic health originally before becoming lean mass hyperresponders, which I'm sure is something you can appreciate. There's been
Absolutely.
there's been this kind of myth, I think, that we went to find the healthiest possible people we could find. And while I do think our cohort, while I do think our cohort is healthier than average, we had a number of people that came from metabolically healthy challenged states, like Susan Bruni, who was a citizen science speaker, and we had a number of people who put up posts, such as having high CAC before then becoming a participant. So anyway, we had that great baseline data, and then the film was filming it as I got to see that data, and then ultimately as I got to see the first longitudinal data, which longitudinal means is now I could see the follow-up scans. And you quite literally see my reaction as Dr. Budoff is presenting it to me for the first time. All of that got filmed, edited, put together, and that's what we all got to preview at COSI this year in February. Now, after that had gone into place, there was a second analysis, which is the quantitative analysis. Specifically, in this case, the next one that came was from an AI-guided service known as Clearly. And Clearly's AI-guided service actually agreed with the 2 major findings from the April 7th paper that we would ultimately publish. Those 2 major findings that both the quantitative and the semi-quantitative that I was just talking about agreed on is that there was a predictive power to baseline plaque. So if you were somebody who came into our study and you had more plaque at baseline, it was very predictive as to the likelihood that you would have follow-up plaque progression. And that is actually in line with a lot of the existing research. So that's where the first part of the paper, Plaque Begets Plaque, came from. The second part of the title, which is ApoB Does Not, is specific to how there is no association between LDL or ApoB and plaque progression, no matter what the LDL levels were, no matter what the ApoB levels were, no matter how it was sub-segmented. Adrian Sotomoda, who's a lead author on the paper, went through all sorts of different variations, could not find anything that showed any association between LDL and ApoB and plaque progression. Now, all of that said, there was some differences between the semi-quantitative analysis and the clearly quantitative analysis, in that at a cohort-wide level, they had some differences, and a bit more than what we would typically see in a study like ours. So that, getting now back to Dave Feldman, the human, that became something I was interested in the moment I was first seeing the preview, because just like in the film, I get to kind of see a behind the scenes look once we hit certain aggregate checkpoints. So I can't influence the research too much beyond what has already been determined. And so I get to just ask questions. And when that came up, that was a very big moment because, were there cameras there? As everyone knows who's behind the scenes, I kept saying, this seems very strange. I'm actually very interested in why there's the difference that I'm seeing between the semi-quantitative and the quantitative data sets. And I was looking up other studies and I was saying, this seems like a bit unusual. But the team pushed back and made 2 points. One, hey, what we're going to publish on, the 2 things that agree on the most, so the plaque predicts the plaque and the ApoB does not. Secondly, even if it's weird data, we still are publishing, right? I mean, and this was kind of an awkward position for me because I'm the funder. As the funder, I can't say, no, we're going to stop. Please keep reworking the data until it makes sense to me. Of course not. We're going to continue moving forward. And besides, we hadn't yet gotten to the final pre-specified methodology, which I haven't yet talked about, which is called QAngio. And that QAngio is what is discussed throughout the protocol and throughout the methods paper and so forth. Clearly, it doesn't even appear anywhere in any of those papers. So that said, I was appreciating the fact that once the April 7th paper would be published, I would at least get a hold of the raw data myself. Even if everybody else seemed to say, well, this seems to make enough sense, let's go ahead and publish. Once I got a hold of the data, then I could at least double check myself. I could look a little bit closer to see if there were some things that were unusual. And that's the part of the story that I can now share a bit more widely. I will concede, I can't talk a lot about what happened behind the scenes, but I can say this much, which is we released that paper April 7th. I got the data in hand, or more specifically, Lundquist delivered the anonymized data to the Citizen Science Foundation, which means it's in my hands, anonymized, for me to then run my own calculations and look at these statistics behind it. And sure enough, there was a number of things that I found that raised some big questions. And I was quite active at both alerting Lundquist and alerting Clearly that there were these issues. Now, that's where it gets a bit more intense, because while there's a lot of flurry of emails going back and forth, we finally got a meeting with the chief medical officer of Clearly, and he happens to also be a co-author on our paper. I presented to him the issues that I was discussing, and some of those issues I presented on, and I can't really even speak to him too much right now because I have to go with what the approval was for what I could share. But one of the most obvious ones was that there was only progression coming from the Clearly data set. There were no regressors in total plaque volume, which is a first ever in data outside of our study. There's never been any analysis, including our own semi-quantitative analysis, for which total plaque volume only increases in all 100% of the patients. You can look right now, and even in placebo groups, there's usually some amount. And I talk about this in the presentation. At least some of that may not even be true regression. It might just be statistical noise at the lowest levels of progression, at the lowest levels of plaque, or I should say at the lowest levels of baseline plaque, with very little change in plaque. There should be some amount of variance going up and down, and there was none in the case of the Clearly analysis. So, I wanted to be sure that HeartFlow see and understand this data. And when I had that meeting with the CMO agreed, and not only agreed that they should run a quality control pass, which is what I was pressing for, just so that they could confirm or disconfirm the results they already had, but that I could also share it publicly, which is what I did in the interview with Darius Sharp. That ends up taking place. then behind the scenes, unfortunately, they changed their mind. They decided that they were not going to do the quality control pass, which really surprised us all. And it was at that point that I said, well, I'm concerned that if we don't get the quality control pass and we do get the QAngio data, certainly I'll have it in my mind. I'm curious about whether or not a different quantitative analysis, especially an AI-guided quantitative analysis, would confirm or disconfirm. And so we then started to engage HeartFlow, which also runs a source very similar to Clearly, although they would bristle at me saying—
I want to pause for a second before you get into that next segment, because I know where you're going with that. But let's pause for a second and look at it from the outside. All of us watching, there was a lot going on at that time. So this study drops. It's all over the social medias. You've got this paper that comes out, and then it's like almost instantaneously there's people with differing ideas that are very vocal and quoting all of this stuff. And I'd say you and Adrian and Nick were engaging at first and then pulled back. So we're all watching this like, okay, what just happened? So can you fill us in on what happened there?
Yeah, so first things first, I want to, as I did at that time, I want to acknowledge that I feel we made a few missteps in our social media rollout. And when we did, my concern was that we weren't acknowledging that. I'm very much pro transparency, and because this is what's so fascinating, is because we seem to have had with all of our previous papers, we just seem to have a constant string of things that worked out and that we stuck landing on. That here was one time where a team got challenged. But the truth is, that's a good thing. It's a good thing to find where you all stand with challenge. And for a moment in time, because of all of the other things that were coalescing around it, because of the size of the coalition at that point, that there was the movie and documentary team, there was Lundquist, which coordinated with us for a press release. There was, of course, some coordination between Budov himself and Adrian. This was the first time he was doing a paper for us for this. There was a lot of crosstalk and a lot of interest in trying to see if we could get to a course for which we could all be very much in sync and make sure that not too many things got, threaded out. I'm not sure how well I'm articulating this, but definitely there was more of an interest in speaking with one voice. And I think that ended up happening behind the scenes as part of why we ended up talking less and engaging more, or engaging as much in social media. Is you could literally look as to my engagement between the 7th and the 18th before I had the data in hand. And you could see the progression of how things were going. And then at a point, I'm dropping off pretty quickly. And I'm starting to alert other people in the team, wait a sec, we kind of need to understand what's going on here, particularly with the Clearly data set. We need to get a better sense of what's happening, particularly if they end up running a quality control check and if that ends up having ramifications with our study. But at the same time, I wanted straight up to acknowledge and own our mistakes publicly, because that was the time to do it. I didn't want to do it months from now, or for that matter, be pushing back and saying our detractors are being unfair, even when a lot of times they definitely were. A lot of times.
Yes, a lot of times.
Yeah.
It got pretty heated there.
Yeah, but here's the thing. I find in life, and I feel we observe it all the time, when there are mistakes made, and they are not the kinds of mistakes that are negligible or small. They are significant enough that they deserve getting an answer to. I hold the highest regard and the highest respect for people who just go out there, they own it, put that forward, and then usually it dies with that, because Now you at least know that they care enough to acknowledge when those mistakes occur, to own it, to apologize to whatever degree is necessary. And as the person who spearheaded this research, I felt like it was, you know, A, it was something that I felt I should be doing, but B, I was sort of the one person, and I don't want to say just the one person, but definitely I was doing a bit of arm twisting behind the scenes on there being something not so, I don't know, pre-scripted or contrived. I said, I know what I respect the most when I see this kind of situation occur with others, which is to just face tough questions and to let that be organic, let it be what it is. And that's what I got with both my interview with Darius Sharp and with Chris McCaskill, who I had on here. So yes, was it shaky at that time? Was there a lot of, volume? 100%. And I don't mind in the fact that I feel like being tested is one of those times where you kind of get a sense of everybody on your team and how they can respond and how well they can do. And I'm honestly pretty proud of how well our team adapted to the new circumstances. And frankly, in many respects, taking some direction from me. Usually I'm more of a conciliatory person to try to keep the coalition together, but there were some dictates that I put out. And I'll be able to share more of those later, but one of those was that I wanted to figure out what was going on with Clearly. We needed to understand what happened. That was a mandate.
Right. And so for us on the outside looking in, you get really quiet, but then the loud voices get to just keep getting louder and louder and louder. But I really don't feel like during that process, the people who had been waiting for years to hear this information stopped wanting to know more. They were just wondering where the heck you guys went. So, and I feel like the consensus among all of us on the outside looking in was, well, just let's wait and be patient and let them keep talking. And we could come to your defense here and there. But then it was like, but they're doing something. Something big is happening that we don't know about yet. So let's just hold on and wait, because you've built that trust with people. It's everything you've done, you've been honest, you're open, you try not to take a side, you try to really stay, pretty even in what your goals are, and you articulate that. So I feel like everybody was waiting fairly patiently, except for the ones that just wanted to bang that same drum about Clearly, which we can say over and over again was not what you were supposed to be using, which now we can get back into the data sets that you were supposed to be getting that weren't ready yet, and then what you did also to kind of give another endpoint, if that's the right way to put it.
Yeah, I mean, I said this in the presentation, I'll say it again here. All of these analyses are looking at the same 200 scans. That can never be repeated enough. So there did seem to be a bit of confusion up there, and probably still is, that the Clearly data set is almost like it's its own data set off the same participants. But what it's doing is it's doing this analysis, this AI-guided reading through these scans. And the more analyses we have against the same 200 scans and how much they do or don't agree with each other becomes very relevant. But it's all the more reason why I just wanted to have more total. If we had only done the Semiquantitative and we had done Clearly, and then we did QAngio, then we'd have 3. 2 of those 3 being quantitative. And that to me was potentially a problem. I'd prefer 2 out of 3 quantitative at least, and that would at least give us a total of 4 analyses when you include the semi-quantitative. So this is where it gets interesting. We engage HeartFlow. HeartFlow behind the scenes has been absolutely fantastic. I have so many good things to say about them with their process. I further said, I'm going to make sure that you guys also guarantee that you'll do a quality control pass as needed, because we want to be sure from now on, every service we ever engage with will guarantee the quality of their data set so that they can confirm or disconfirm its original results, right? And A, they were like, of course, that's actually standard. But B, on top of that, we had an extremely guaranteed process of blinding. So it's what I'm calling cross-entity blinding, which is to say that Lundquist didn't deliver it to HeartFlow. Lundquist delivered it to a third-party cardiologist, and then I had my own technologist who then further scrubbed all data from the metadata that was unlike the data that was delivered to Clearly. So the data that showed up at the door of HeartFlow was absolutely, completely blinded. That data set, when it came back, did look a lot more like what I was expecting. It looks a lot more like the other data sets that are outside of our study and fit a lot more of what I would expect, including what I was just mentioning as far as there being a deviation that goes up and down for very low levels of plaque. But importantly, like the semi-quantitative data, there were regressors. There were people who actually had less plaque than when they started. A significant number of them, in fact. And that too was something I was excited about. But this part's important. How much did you hear about us chatting about HeartFlow after HeartFlow dropped? That was part of the dictate.
There was no chatter, none whatsoever.
No. I told the team over and over again, we will put this data out, but it'll just be via boot off. It'll be one talk. I went ahead and posted it. That was it. I did not want us commenting on it or anything until the QAngio data came back, the fourth and final. And in fact, when I posted Dr. Budoff's talk, I emphasized that this was not the last analysis on it. And again, so proud of my team, because of course, many on the team were like, oh, this seems to keep reaffirming the issues that we see with Clearly. It's further distinguishing how it's different. And I'm saying, let's not make any more mistakes like that. Let's get to where the final pre-specified methodology, QAngio, is in hand. And at that point in time, we can finally look at how all four of them compare to each other. So we get there. We get to where all four of them compare to each other. And sure enough, QAngio is very much in line in many respects with HeartFlow, but in particular in the ways that we care considerably about, which is in the absolute plaque volume levels. And that became honestly, we were just extremely excited. The challenge is that this is all in the wake of the Clearly data set, that analysis. And all I can say is that there has been a lot of discussions that have been going on behind the scenes. We've anticipated that as more and more data comes in, beyond the data that's outside of our study, that keeps distinguishing why the Clearly data set seems so anomalous. But frankly, data inside the study on the same scans, we would hope will be something Clearly we'll care about.
So when you said that HeartFlow had a completely blinded data set, did Clearly not? Were they able to see things, or you don't know?
So their data set was not blinded. It was the dates were in the metadata. This was at odds with what Dr. Budoff's strict instruction was. That's not common. He's very clear that he wants his labs to only ever deliver fully blinded data. And so in an interview that he had with Jen Eisenhart for the documentary, he acknowledged that this was a lab mistake that was made on their part. But again, I would hope that Clearly would further consider this that much more important, that we would want to run a fully blinded quality control pass just like we did with HeartFlow. But that hasn't yet come to pass.
Perhaps that's in the future, and perhaps it's not. So, but what you have said, though, is that you now have 4 readings of the same data, and 2 of the quantitative ones agree. 1 seems to be an anomaly, and then the semi-quantitative one, with the experts reading it with their own eyes, these are people we have trusted for years to read these studies, agrees with the other 2 as well. So that's great news. right? This is what you talked about in your talk at the SMH conference.
Well, this is at the SMH, yes, at the SMH conference. Importantly, this can't be overstated. Importantly, we don't just have regression across 3 of these data sets other than clearly. All 3 of them. We have it directly verified by Dr. Budoff's people and himself. Was showing regression, scan next to scan regression that Dr. Budoff has presented. We will actually be showing several in the documentary that Dr. Budoff and his team have prepared. So I want to state this plainly so there's no misunderstanding. If you are believing that the clearly data may in fact turn out to be the most accurate, you need to reconcile that it is the one data set that says there is no total plaque volume regression in a single participant, in spite of what I just said, in spite of all 3 data sets showing that there is regression, not just in 1 or 2, but in multiples. And that Dr. Budoff's scans, literally he's putting in front of our eyes, showing the regression from baseline to follow-up is incorrect. And I don't know a better way of putting it than that. I think I would hope would compel everybody to care about the importance of this.
Yes, absolutely. So you have something that is just so wildly different than everything else. And so everyone knows, that talk is on Dave's YouTube channel, and he has the images on the screen. So you can actually see those images, which is very nice that they let you take that outside of the conference page and put that on your own page. I'm sure you had to twist some arms there to get that done. But it was a very important piece for all of us to see that, you know, you guys went quiet. Because, you know, from our perspective, we're not seeing all this behind the scenes stuff. So you guys went quiet, and then you come out with like a lot of information, 2 more scans. You have the images. You now have the data in your hands. You can do stuff with it. And so moving forward, obviously, you know, you've kind of hit a tripping spot. You found out how each other can deal with this adversity when it comes across on the social media. Going forward, how do you think that changes how you present your information?
Well, certainly we have some things that, there are some things that I was already kind of in favor of us doing originally that I'm now getting my way on a bit more. I shouldn't say what they are just yet. I'll just say it's a team effort altogether. But with that said, there are some things that I'm appreciative of, for which we got tested, for which I am more in favor of, that have to do with transparency. Let me give you an example. We got to put out the raw data set of both the quantitative and semi-quantitative, or at least the major pieces that we were reporting on, such as total plaque score and CAC in the semi-quantitative, and total plaque volume, or I'm sorry, non-calcified plaque volume and calcified plaque volume in the quantitative data set. And that to me is awesome. I want the raw data, as you know, put out as soon as possible, but I do have to work with my research partners. To be fair to them, I keep getting a lot of people to do stuff for me for free because it's a charitable effort. And I find that when I'm the one who's doing a lot of sacrificing, it's hard to turn me down. It's hard to be like, no, we should get, and I'm like, well, we're all in this. But part of their feedback, their benefit, is that they have more published papers, they can make more decisions on the research and so forth. So it's a lot for me to ask for them to put in their sweat and blood when their careers are on the line, to then say, and now I want to immediately release all this data for other people to make their papers on, and so on and so forth. But with that said, Robyn, you know me pretty well by now. That to me is the story of science, the best science. The best science is open, you know, the best disinfectant, sunlight, right? In some alternate universe where I didn't have it contractual, which I would get a hold of those data, clearly we'd be in a different timeline, right? Because it, you know, I was just curious enough and interested enough to really dig down and try to start pulling at some threads. So that part I like. But there is one other silver lining. We're kind of in a large-scale social experiment right now, Robyn. What happened when we released the match analysis? Those detractors that were there post April 7th, were they commenting a lot on the match analysis from last year that was looking especially good for our cohort versus the Miami Heart match group? Again, I don't want to make it sound as if it's you know, a sports game where one group is getting points, one isn't. But it is interesting because it does illuminate how much there's reporting based on where the understanding of the state of things are. And after the April 7th paper, and especially at a point in which I'm telling everybody I'd like you to be less engaged in social media while we're getting this clearly data figured out, knowing how attached detractors to our research would become to the clearly data, I feel glad about how we, were tested ourselves, but also I was interested in how many people who would be detractors following the clearly data would care about what I was sharing on social media with what we'd found out since, and especially since the conference presentation that I gave recently. And we're watching it in real time, right? When are the videos being made? What are they discussing? What do they find that they care the most about? And I think that's all very valuable to all of us.
And it's been very interesting because this video has been out now a couple weeks, and I'm not seeing all of that. I'm not seeing all of those detractors coming out. Either they've decided that maybe they need to put their tail between their legs and just hide for a little bit, or maybe they're just reading through it all very, very carefully with a fine-tooth comb. I don't know, but it has not had the same response as it did in April.
And for what it's worth, there's 3 that I think I have a fairly good rapport with. Simon Hill, Gil Cavato, I hope I'm saying his name right, and Lane Norton. Even though they tend to be commonly critical of the low-carb community, I feel like I've had many great private and public conversations with them. All 3 of them I've been proactively engaging with, particularly given that I have a strong disagreement with something that was there even before we had the additional data sets, which was this kind of saturation hypothesis, is sort of what I'm calling it, which is that everybody had high LDL. That's how it keeps getting described, as though it's this narrow range of LDL. And therefore, the lack of association between LDL cholesterol and ApoB and progression of plaque can just be explained that way, that it's just this small, tiny band. But I disagreed with it then, and I certainly disagree with it now, but that was another thing that I didn't want to engage with then until we could fully talk about everything on the table. Now that it's out, I kind of gently, used all 3 of these gentlemen that I feel like I have a good rapport with to point out what I believe. I believe this is actually one of the biggest misses that maybe our critics got, because we did have our standard deviation reported in table 1 of our paper. We did have the interquartile range in our paper. You could tell that we did have a massive spread of LDL to look at against the exposure for the outcome of plaque progression. So even without knowing yet that there were any issues with the clearly data, you still had to sort of contend with what is the present day lipid hypothesis, which is that we should expect a dose response in this population. And I feel like that was kind of brushed by, going back to, the post-April 7th activity. And now I was curious if whether or not that would change since, and especially addressing it more directly. And thus far, I've not seen it addressed.
No, me neither. I mean, there's been very little chatter about it, and you guys are ready. Like you've now done all these things together. You know what the answers are for you based on this research, and you could actually speak to it now where you couldn't before. And there's not a lot of pushback, and I think that speaks a lot too. But also having pushback, having those conversations, that's it. I think you said it earlier. It is a good thing. It is a good thing to have these conversations. We can't just like toss a paper out there and be like, this is it, it's final, stamp it, it's approved. It just doesn't work that way. There's going to be these kinds of conversations, and they're good. They should be good, healthy conversations that make you think and make you want to question more, and then in turn, perhaps study more deeply. Because for me, I'm just on the other side of this, just, with a phenotype of an LMHR that has to decide between having a cholesterol number that fits within the current guidelines or being severely depressed. I'm going to go with not being severely depressed. Don't really understand all the nuance. I'm leaving it all to you guys. And one day I hope that I can very confidently say, this is what the research is showing. And I feel like I'm there now. This is what the research is showing. I really believe this. While it might not be set in stone, this is why I'm making the decision that I'm making. And I feel comfortable with that because you're out there doing this work.
Well, and I think we can all be good scientists. And certainly I said this, I think I even said this in the presentation where I'm dropping all of this amazing data, that I still leave open the possibility that we get to the 5-year data. If we can re-recruit a good portion of existing participants, and the 5-year data, there might be some marginal emergence of an association between LDL and plaque development. And if so, we'd be very interested in what that looked like. But that said, again, how much can we all come together and stay on top of the data we have on hand to keep looking through this? My hope is that we work that out, that we get everybody ultimately recognizing good data and keeping this conversation moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell us more about 5-year data. What's going on with the next step?
Yeah, so we started our scans in October of 2021. And the reason that's important information is it determines whether or not we're going to do 4 or 5-year scans. So if we're going to do 4-year scans, that means we need to start the process back over again this October. I'm going to be honest, I'm feeling the odds are really low on that now. We've chatted about it internally. Unfortunately, the more recent events, and particularly trying to get this worked out with Clearly, has been taking, there's a horse and cart thing going on here, right? So we would love to get this all resolved enough before we get the extension going. And I'm willing to bet that no, instead it'll be 5-year scans, which means that we'd be starting in October of next year, of 2026. And I don't mind that because that's going to be amazing data. There's very rarely this level of a span in longitudinal CT angiograms. And we're talking about not just typical populations that they're looking at, which tend to be more at risk. We're talking about our population, which are they at risk? Well, again, we've now have 4 analyses that we can look at against the same 200 scans. Certainly, if we've got 5 years between the first scan and the third one, that'll be really incredible. And with 1 scan in between, we can actually look at something that's more like a true trajectory. Now, there have been some number of participants that have left the diet or may have since taken steps based on what their existing data that came back as. But that's okay. We'd like to capture that too, depending on how many would like to consent to it. So for example, if some of the participants that found that they had a lot of plaque and wanted to take steps to do something about it, such as going on various medications or other activities, again, data is a spectrum. We want to get it all. And if they're willing to come back and get scanned again and we can cover it and carry forth what interventions they took on, that's only going to, I think, help all of us to get greater and greater perspective. But yeah, no question. It's been a marathon of marathons. Ooh, one more checkpoint though.
You go through you go through one finish line and it's like, oh wait, I gotta keep going. So in your mind, are you picturing this next cohort to be the same 100, but then also doubling it? I think you talked about at one point having a larger study. Are you going to try to stick with the same and then add to it?
Well, no, that's the good news. The good news is what I just discussed is its own scope.
Okay.
That's basically an extension to the existing study. This other study I codenamed the Triad study. In the Triad study, we know two things most of all. One is that we want to have a control group, and one is that we want to have a more permissive eligibility. So in other words, the eligibility before, for example, having an LDL of 190 or higher, we probably still want to have high LDL at baseline. But HDL being 60 or higher and triglycerides of being 80 or lower might be something more like 50 HDL and higher and 100 triglycerides of 100 and lower. We might allow for things like a previous but moderately increased risk factor, such as somebody who might have been a prior smoker, such as somebody who might have recovered from a diagnosis of hypertension, things along those lines that we had as exclusionary criteria in this initial study. And we think that the IRB will work with us more, given the data we have in hand right now for the current study. But there's also talk that we may, again, those two things still being intact, there's also talk about possibly doing an RCT, randomized control trial. And that could be exciting for multiple reasons. But we kind of want to find out where the gauge of the community is at, what they're willing to do, because recruitment itself is a very important component to all of this. And it's another reason why we wanted to be sure that everybody got all of the data on the table before I could even be talking about this. All of my podcast interviews, I mean, I went out with the ones that I was scheduled for, but you'll notice there was this big lull through the summer. That's because we wanted to get to this point where we'd finally have a strong perspective based on the data we had in hand. And that includes being able to talk about things like the coming studies, because it's important for us to understand.
Yeah, and it's really hard to understand someone who's like, well, I can't talk about that yet. So it's okay that you took a little time off to dot your I's and cross your T's. That's fine, at least for me, from a listening perspective. So we're running low on time. Of course, you are now a podcaster yourself. So I'd like you to talk about I'm going to switch gears, like a complete halt to the other conversation, and switch gears and let you talk about your new project, the Feldman Protocol.
Yeah, I just been wanting to do this for like a long time. I always enjoyed podcasting, interviewing others, but the challenge was that I have a lot of fun connecting with friends like we're doing now over Zoom. But there really is a different dynamic when you're sitting with someone and you're connecting and you're picking up more inferences, and there's just a greater, for me, there's just a greater, warmth and viability to the conversation in many ways. Now, there's a big challenge to that too, which of course, people don't physically like to go to entirely different places in order to have a conversation for a podcast. But I'm fortunate enough to have a number of friends that are, like Gary Taubes, who could do something like this for us for a favor, and have such a great conversation. And so far, I want to say we have maybe 13 episodes in the can. And a lot of them are going to be broken up. The one that I had with Nick Norwitz is 6 hours long, which we're probably going to break into 3 parts. It's so involved.
I said that everyone's going to take me like a whole month to get through, but yeah. It's okay. I'm sure it's wonderful.
It is. And it's been one thing that I'll concede I've been looking forward to the most, is unpacking these larger subjects and not feeling like there's a time limit that's lording over us as much, just really getting in deep. It's something I've always been jealous of Rogan for having, just getting lots of these interesting voices in his room and being able to just have these great, intelligent discussions.
As of right now, I've only listened to 1 episode, but the conversation was very intriguing. I enjoyed it a lot. So I'm looking forward to seeing or hearing more of them as they come out. And I don't know, I don't think you'll have any problem getting people to agree to come out to Vegas and visit you. And
I know.
I mean, it doesn't seem like it would be a lot different for me to be like, hey, come to Dallas and sit in my living room and talk. You're in Vegas, like you can totally make it a thing. I feel like you'll be very successful with that. So that's exciting. And then I also want to ask two more big things. One being, do you have an update on the film? Because obviously the film we saw in February can't be the same as the film that's going to come
Right.
out. There's got to be an addendum at least of some sort. I've been talking to Jen. She's been a little tight-lipped about it. But, so what is going on with the film?
Yeah, I mean, it's, I mentioned earlier, this chapter is being added to the end, but also will have some teasing at the front end. And let's face it, it makes it more of an exciting story, right? A lot of times, right when you're feeling like you've already seen enough of the struggle and the challenge, which there was plenty in our existing film, then you've got like the super big climax at the end. And to some degree that's being written right now, but obviously for me, seeing both HeartFlow and QAngio come back in the way that I was hoping that they would be was one of those moments where I was like, oh, I can see roughly what the end of the film is probably going to be.
Well, that's good. I'm glad you have a good vision on what's next. So we're all just patiently waiting for this film to come out, I must say. But Jen was kind enough to share the link with me in May while I was with my dad. So we did get to see the film together. And so that was good. I was glad to have that experience, but I'm watching the end of it going, whew, this is going to have to be completely different now. I do not envy them what they have in front of them. So
and that takes time, by the way. Like, Jen is amazing and her team is fantastic, but you've got to, I've already seen it. I've already been inside the sausage making. It takes a long time to do the edit. They have to do a mix down for all of the sound. They have to work through the score. They have to do a whole lot with the editing, the colorist. There's so many things. There's so many moving parts post-production wise. Now, this is by no means a suggestion that I think, might happen, but timing wise, it would be kind of cool if it worked out, since it is probably going to take, I don't know, 5-6 months, that it might land at around the same time we have our third and likely final COSI.
Here's me with my sad face about it maybe being the final COSI. I heard whispers of that after the conference, and I was like, no, I love COSI. It's so much fun. But that'll be good. We can have another big party.
Yeah,
it's a lot of
if somebody else wants to take that off our hands and run it for us, sure. But they got to do it the same way we do, where every single dime that we're raising, outside of credit card fees or whatever, we have such a killer threshold of charitable contribution proportion. I want to say it's something like 95% or 96% or something like that. It's ridiculous. But that's hard to get people to. It's hard to get people to do a conference.
I did tell Eric, our friend Eric Rogers, that I would bring him up. So, dude, hi. Maybe we'll just go ahead and throw him as the person that has to put it all together.
Yeah, listen, Eric is amazing. He is one of the best, and I look forward to seeing him at the conference as well.
Yeah, he's always great to talk to. And he was the one that was keeping me informed while I was kind of offline of everything that was going on and explaining it to me. So without him, I'd be completely lost as to what was happening, other than there's angry people on X and I don't know why. So he was filling in all the gaps for me.
That's always the case, though. So
that's true. There's always angry people on X. Well, that would be very exciting. I mean, it's sad that it would have to wait this much longer. I understand, having been part of the process myself. I think I was asked to be in the film 2 years ago, this month. So it was 2 years ago this month, and there was a lot there. So we had to wait for this paper to come out. Then we have to wait for the follow-up, and it's just, there's a lot there. So I don't envy them the process that they're going through now. And I guess you have to go sit in the booth again and and narrate a story.
Narration, right?
Yeah, there's a lot yet to be done, but I'm crossing my fingers. It's Laura's senior year of high school, so I'm hoping that your COSI conference does not fall at the same time as something majorly important in the life of a senior, so that I can be there for that, because it is a lot of fun, and I'm happy that I got to go to both COSIs, and I will do my darndest to get to number 3 as well.
Yeah, and I can talk to you offline on when I think the approximate timing probably will.
Okay, and then I'll just post it online. It's cool.
Yeah, exactly. I'm pretty sure we know the date, but I'm not supposed to say until closer to a few weeks from now.
Well, if you just let me pencil it in my calendar, we won't tell anybody. So, well, I really appreciate you coming on and explaining that. It's amazing that, let's say I start the timer. It's been 52 minutes of talking, and really you've only talked about from April to today. Like that, so much has happened, and I'm sure there's a lot more things that have happened. I know somewhere in there you actually have a personal life, so I would hope that somewhere you actually have a personal life. And if you've been pushing that aside, let's take some time for some self-care. I'm granting you the wish of self-care, because I appreciate everything you do. I know that so many of us that are in this situation where we're forced to make a decision, and we really don't understand what that decision really means. It's really a difference between feeling better and seeing a number. Like, these numbers aren't necessarily something I would understand just as a regular person, and I still have to make a decision based on that. So without you out there kind of banging this drum and pushing this forward, there'd be a whole lot of us seeking treatments that wouldn't necessarily be the right course of action, and we'd all be kind of stuck back where we were. So you've kind of opened up a door and the availability for myself, and I'm sure many others, to live a life that we didn't think we could live. So I appreciate you so much for everything that you do.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm going to let you go off and maybe do something, like go play a video game or something. Go have some fun. Just turn off for a little while. I know you've had a hectic morning, so turn off for a little while, do something for yourself. And thank you so much for joining us on Ketobiography.
Thank you for having me, Robyn.
Of course.